My name's Becky Wilson and I work for the Farm Carbon Toolkit.
Yes, wonderful. So, Becky, let's start off by asking what the Farm Carbon Toolkit is and how you got involved in it, I think, to start off with.
Okay, so the Farm Carbon Toolkit, we are a farmer-led organisation really aiming to try and provide practical tools and resources on all the fun stuff, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving energy resilience, improving soil health with a particular focus on business resilience. Where we differ from some other organisations is that we were set up by farmers for farmers. So what we try and do is really think about what are the things that farmers need to know about this topic?
Yeah.
How can we frame them and talk about them in a way which means they can see the direct impact on their business? So we have a carbon calculator, which allows farmers to be able to measure what they're currently doing in terms of quantify their greenhouse gas emissions and also look about where they're delivering solutions. And measurement is one part of it, you know, but we also go, well, so what? What does that mean? What can I do about it? I mean, how does that relate practically to what I'm trying to do on my farm?
And do you find that farmers are taking this as an easy step to when you introduce this to a new farm, for example, that maybe don't have much of an idea around carbon neutrality or carbon footprint? Is it an easy progress to guide them down the route of learning and integrating that into their day-to-day life?
The hardest step is that first step in terms of having us on the farm or getting engaged with it. Once you actually start looking at it, because again, farmers can be really worried about the word carbon. They can think that you're going to say, I can't do this anymore, or I have to do this, or actually you're going to make me desperately change the way that what I want to do on the farm. But in reality, there is a really lovely relationship between managing carbon and improving your business performance. So there's loads of things that you can do that actually will help directly impact your bottom line. It's not this fluffy environmental thing. There actually are things that will absolutely. And then, you know, one of the other challenges we have with carbon is we can't see it. You know, it's these sort of emissions, but where are these emissions coming from? It's not something we can grab hold of, and it's quite difficult sometimes to get your head around it. But if we come back a step and think, okay, what do I actually have to do on the farm? It's all about how I manage my soils, my rotations, my livestock, my fertilizer. And the fact that as farmers, we are uniquely able to deliver solutions. You suddenly turn that conversation around as to something where farmers think, you're going to tell me I can't do this, to how can I actually provide my positive contribution, not just to my farm, but to the wider society.
So that's an incredible answer. So where does the carbon actually, or where would the carbon come from on a farm? So I'd suspect tractors would be one.
Absolutely. So the thing to remember when we think about farming and agriculture, if we think about other industries, so if we think about, you know, energy, transport, any of those sorts of things, predominantly we're thinking about carbon dioxide, so burning of fossil fuels, the use of energy, fuel, that sort of thing. When we're on a farm, although we still talk about carbon, we're actually in reality thinking about 3 different greenhouse gases. So absolutely, we're still using energy. So driving tractors, fuel, all that is carbon. That's like other industries. But what we also have is that we are emitting 2 other gases. So we're emitting methane from how we're managing our animals, so our ruminant animals, our manures. And then we're also emitting nitrous oxide, which is coming from how we're managing our soils, what we're doing in terms of applying any fertilizers and managing our manures. So again, it adds an extra level of complexity for farmers, because we're not just thinking about 1 gas, we're thinking about 3. But what we also have is that we are unique in our ability to take that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and store it on our farm. So although we're delivering some of the problem, we are also the only industry that can deliver the solution.
Because the crops breathe carbon.
Photosynthesis, absolutely. So that process that we all learned about at GCSE in biology, suddenly it's really important, because actually how we take that carbon out of the atmosphere and we hold it in our soils, our trees, our hedgerows, our environmental areas, that is a really important positive thing that we need to be shouting about and championing.
Interesting, because some people wouldn't recognise that. As much as we might have all learned it, it might not some people don't. Like, I probably didn't put 2 and 2 together. That is quite fascinating. And do you find that people are educated when you guys first step on it's a big education step? They learn and that progress grows.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, when we can start to, I say, bust some of those myths, help them to understand that they are part of the solution, suddenly it becomes a much easier conversation to have. And it's about, well, how can I do it? And as I say, you can also then link it to the fact that by doing it, you can reduce your costs, you can improve all those other things. So there's actually a load of really positive things to come out of it. It's just getting over some of those initial humps about it's going to be something that I don't want to do. And even, you know, I'm a saddo. I love carbon. I realise I'm probably a population of one, but trying to spread the enthusiasm about carbon. We get there eventually, but sometimes it's a bit
People are scared, aren't they? I would suspect,
Absolutely.
because it's
Absolutely.
an area that they don't know much
It's
about.
new, and as I say, it's seen as another potential threat, whereas in reality, it's an opportunity.
Yeah, 100%. And I did a little bit of research before, and you just mentioned there your tools account for hedges and trees. Does it mix into soil and grassland, and how does that become necessary?
Absolutely.
It really just talk me through the difference between how you'd manage hedges and trees compared to like sort of your soil and grassland areas. What would the difference be?
Yeah. So basically, if we think about any sort of above ground biomass, so our hedgerows, our trees, it's actually quite easy to include those in our footprints, because there's a lovely spreadsheet that says that if you have this tree, this is how much carbon it's sequestering, and what it will also do is it will allow us to understand, depending on how old that tree is and how many we plant, very easy to do. What often happens then is we think that's the only option for sequestration, but in reality, our soils are storing so much carbon. Our soils actually store more carbon than the rainforests. They are incredibly rich in carbon. But one of the challenges we have in terms of measuring it is that there is so much variation. So all soil types are different, farmers are different. So in terms of, hedges and trees, yes, very important, but often they're thought of as the only option. But what we can do in terms of improving the carbon content in our soil, not only can that massively outperform what trees do. So grasslands can do much more than trees can in terms of sequestering carbon.
Wow.
And it's producing food, and it's improving our farm business. So there's all these positives, but the challenge has been, how do we measure it? And we don't have that lovely spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So how do we get those measurements to be able to show the potential? So you don't need to be changing much in terms of building your organic matter to have a massive impact on your carbon value.
Yeah.
But we need to have the data to be able to showcase what is happening on an individual farm basis.
So if you plough a grass field, for example, does that, this is me learning here, if you plough a field, does that release carbon when you turn the soil over because it's stored in the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. So that soil has carbon within it. When you turn that soil over and you suddenly introduce oxygen into that because you're turning it over, that oxygen stimulates the millions of microbes that live within our soil, and they go, whoa, they have a party. And a process of that party is that they respire, and so the carbon dioxide goes up. Now, So traditionally you might think ploughing is always bad, but again, in agriculture, nothing is simple. So if you've got fields that actually you need to plough because they either have soil structural issues or you need to do that reseed, ploughing on its own is not the worst thing in the world. It's the frequency of ploughing and the depth of ploughing. But if you've had a field that has not been disturbed for a long time, and then you plough it, you will release that carbon up into the atmosphere.
So if you, instead of ploughing yearly, for example, for arable crops, would you push towards cultivating or ragging it like with the big prongs?
Absolutely.
Which would be an alternative to a yearly ploughing cycle?
Absolutely. So you can move towards more minimal cultivations. So rather than actually completely inverting that soil, thinking about sticking a disc through it, sticking a tine through it, something else which allows you to do what you need to do in terms of establish that next crop, but you're not doing that turning over process. If you are at that point in the rotation where you do need to do that inversion because you want that really good establishment, it's about thinking about the depth that you're ploughing. So do you have to always plough to 6 inches, or can you potentially come a little bit shallower, because then you're exposing less of that soil to the atmosphere to be able to let that go up.
That actually makes sense.
Good.
That does make sense. And I've also noticed there's quite, maybe, I don't know how to word this really, but rewilding is quite a big thing at the moment. And sometimes farmers can think that's shying them away from the traditional farming method of growing crops and putting livestock on that ground. And could you maybe sort of clear up that little grey area of what rewilding actually means, and how can you integrate that into a system where you can do that for a 7-year cycle like you would on a field, for example? Some people do that. Do you think that grey area is really necessary?
I think one of the challenges we have with the term rewilding is that it can mean different things to different people. So, and I think we have a bit of a
I agree with you there,
distinction between basically having a field where you shut the gate, you walk away and you almost abandon it.
Mm-hmm.
You let its success, you let nature do its thing. Or you have ones where actually you are still actively managing that field, you're just doing it in a particularly different way. If we think about that where you shut the gate and you walk away and abandon it, what we're actually trying to do with carbon is we're trying to cycle it. So we need that action, again, going back to photosynthesis, we need that action of that grass to be grazed, or we need something to happen in order for that to stimulate that carbon cycle to go round. If we walk away and we abandon it, what happens is that your carbon level will saturate. So you'll get to a point where you can't get any more carbon coming in because those plants have almost successed onto being scrub or trees or those sorts of things, as opposed to thinking about the way that you manage that land which has got livestock, you're maintaining that carbon cycle. So rewilding can sometimes be a really difficult term because it means different things. But if we can think about managing our fields in a way which produces foods, supports nature, cycles nutrients, that's where we want to be. That's the nirvana, without potentially sometimes calling it rewilding. Yes,
it's certainly a grey area, isn't it?
Yeah.
So next would be, now this is more of a question I thought of.
Yeah.
But what would sort of reining this and leading on to finishing the conversation?
Yeah.
Have you ever thought of any? Or can you think of any funny reactions that you've ever experienced when you've walked on a farm and you've tried to explain this to a farmer or farm worker and he's gone, what? This is crazy. Have you got any that spring to mind instantly?
All the time. I mean, I am often known as the mad soil lady because, I get very overexcited when we're in the field. So, I mean, there's loads. And it's often in terms of really cool, interesting things like the value of grazing livestock and actually, that animal eating the grass. There's stuff in that animal's saliva that actually stimulates the soil microbes to suck up the methane that's in them. There's these bonkers things that are going on. We get very overexcited about worms because worms are such a good indicator. And, so it's like but really great. I had one farmer where I went and he was really skeptical. I sent me out to do some soil assessments and to look what was going on. I was sending him pictures of the worms that I was finding. He was like, you need to get out more. 3 months later, he now sends me pictures of his worms when he goes and sees them. So it's about, helping them to understand the practical value of these sorts of things.
Worms. Worms. I'm going to be thinking about worms all afternoon.
There is a World Worm Week.
Really?
There is a week in October, it's coming up, where we celebrate the world of the earthworm. Absolutely. And we count them. And honestly.
Can you believe that? So then leading on to the final question, Becky, I mean, thank you very much for coming. But the big one is, in 10 years' time or so, what's carbon counting going to be looking like? Are we going to be looking at more robots on the farm, more trees around farms, more or less livestock? Yeah, what does the next, just to finish this off nicely for the listener, what does the next 10 years look like? Where do we see this going? What's developing?
I mean, I think, you can quite easily get quite miserable about this sort of stuff, but I am incredibly positive about the future for agriculture. If we go back to what I was saying earlier about the value of that carbon cycle needs livestock, it needs rotations, it needs soil. So the value of farmers to deliver these public goods is never been stronger. So
really?
We have a healthy, thriving countryside that has livestock in it, that has grass in it, that has crops that we're growing, because, we have this incredible ability as farmers to feed people, to feed them healthy food, to do all, deliver all of the things that we need to deliver to ensure that our planet thrives. And farmers are at the center of that.
Yeah.
And by understanding what's happening with carbon, it gives us a really good opportunity to start to talk about those positives. So I am incredibly optimistic and positive about what's coming in the future, and farmers are at the center of that. And by understanding where they are now, it gives them that really good platform to look at how can they create a business which is fit for the future, because we are in these periods of increasing change with weather, with prices, with policies, but actually understanding how you can use your farm to deliver a sustainable business, to deliver a profitable business, and to deliver a performing business, it ticks all the boxes. So why would you not do it?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you very much for talking to me, Becky Wilson. You are the most passionate person I've ever come across when it comes to carbon. I absolutely love it. Thank you very much for talking to me.
No problem at all.